The verse. Everyone quotes, but no one obeys. You have heard this verse before. You may have quoted it. You may have memorized it. You may even believe you understand it. But no one ever told you who it was actually written for. Because this verse was never meant to comfort the poor. It was meant to separate them. And that's the part they don't preach. Most people encounter Scripture emotionally. They read it for hope, for relief, for reassurance. But Scripture was never designed as emotional therapy. It was designed as instruction, and instruction is only useful to those positioned to execute it. Here is the uncomfortable truth most religious systems avoid. The Bible does not speak equally to everyone at the same time. Some verses are directional, some are corrective, some are conditional, and some are selective. They were never meant to apply universally. Yet this one verse, this specific verse, has been flattened, diluted, and weaponized to keep people passive. And if you've been poor long enough, it has probably been used against you. The verse that sounds humble, but isn't the verse, is often quoted like this: "The love of money is the root of all evil." But that's not the verse. That's the slogan. The actual verse is sharper, more surgical, and far more dangerous if misunderstood. Because the verse isn't condemning wealth, it's condemning a specific psychological relationship with money. And here's the key. That relationship only exists when money is absent. You cannot crave what you command. You only obsess over what you lack. Which means the verse is not a warning to the wealthy. It is a diagnosis of poverty psychology. But that interpretation is rarely taught because it removes comfort, and comfort is profitable. Why this verse was never taught to the poor? Correctly. Let's be honest. If you are struggling financially, this verse feels soothing. It tells you, you're not greedy. You're not corrupt. You're morally superior. And in exchange, it quietly tells you to stay where you are. That's the trade. Moral comfort in exchange for economic stagnation. But Scripture never rewards stagnation. It punishes it. From Genesis onward, scarcity is never romanticized. It is escaped, confronted, engineered out of. The men who prospered in Scripture were not praised for wanting less. They were praised for mastery, stewardship, and expansion. Abraham was wealthy. Isaac was wealthier. Jacob engineered systems. Joseph ran supply chains. And Solomon controlled trade routes. None of them were celebrated for being broke and humble. They were celebrated for obedience plus execution. Why the poor love? This verse and the wealthy don't quote it. Here's something you'll notice if you pay attention. Wealthy people rarely quote this verse. They don't need to. Because they're not emotionally entangled with money, they use it like a tool. Poor people quote it often, because they are still negotiating with desire. And that's the trap. The verse was not meant to shame ambition. It was meant to warn against emotional dependence. But emotional dependence on money only exists when money controls your decisions. And money only controls your decisions when you don't have enough of it. Which means the verse is not anti-wealth. It's anti-lack. The hidden layer. Why context changes everything. Scripture does not operate in isolation. Verses are nested inside economic realities. The men receiving instruction were already positioned. They owned land. They managed people. They controlled resources. So when a warning is issued, it is issued to men with capacity, not men without leverage. Telling a starving man not to love bread is pointless. He needs bread. Telling a man with warehouses not to worship bread, that is instruction. And this is where misinterpretation becomes dangerous. Because when you give elite instruction to the unpositioned, you create confusion, guilt, and resignation. Why this verse creates passive men. Let's say a man is struggling, bills unpaid, no leverage, no skills with market demand. And he hears this verse framed as, money is dangerous, desire is evil. What does he do? He suppresses hunger. He suppresses ambition. He calls survival contentment. And the system applauds him. But Scripture never tells a man to suppress hunger. It tells him to direct it. Because hunger fuels movement, and movement changes position. The wealth code, hidden in plain sight. The real instruction behind this verse is not, do not pursue wealth. It is, do not let money become your identity, and identity only fuses with money when money is missing. Once wealth becomes boring, predictable, and controlled, the emotional charge disappears. That is why wealthy men talk about legacy, structure, and systems. Poor men talk about money emotionally. Scripture is warning you not to stay emotional. It's telling you to outgrow the phase, but the part no one likes to admit. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Some verses only make sense after you escape poverty. Until then, they sound like moral commands, but they are actually maintenance instructions. This verse was never meant to keep you poor. It was meant to keep you sane after wealth arrives. But when you give a maintenance manual to someone without the machine, you create confusion, and confusion breeds theology that comforts instead of elevates. The dangerous lie that came from misreading this verse. The lie is subtle. If I desire wealth, I am corrupt. That lie has destroyed more potential than greed ever has, because greed at least moves, shame freezes, and frozen men do not build. The question that changes everything. Ask yourself this honestly. Does this verse challenge you to rise, or does it give you permission to remain small? Because Scripture never gives permission for smallness. We're going to expose who this verse was actually written for, why wealthy men understand it instinctively, and how misusing it keeps generations trapped, because once you see the verse correctly, you can never hear it the same way again. And that's when the code unlocks. Because this verse was never meant to soothe. It was meant to filter. Scripture doesn't fence people in. It filters people out. And this verse is one of the strongest filters in the entire text. Who? This verse was actually written. For this verse was written for men approaching wealth, not men trapped beneath it. It was written for men whose next danger was not hunger, but distortion, because wealth doesn't corrupt character, it amplifies it. And the moment money becomes identity, clarity collapses. That is what the verse is warning against. Not earning, not expansion, not dominance, but worship. Why wealthy men? Read this verse differently. To a wealthy man, the verse reads like a reminder. Don't lose your center. To a poor man, it sounds like a command. Don't want more. That difference alone tells you who it was meant for. The Jewish wealth perspective that changes everything. In Jewish wisdom, money is not spiritual or unspiritual. It is neutral energy. It reveals order or disorder, wisdom or foolishness, vision or chaos. Which is why money is never feared, only mishandled. The verse is not anti-money. It is anti-confusion. Why poverty needs this verse but can't use it yet. Here is the paradox. The poor need this verse most, but they cannot apply it until after ascent, because first comes acquisition, then comes discipline. You don't teach restraint before capacity. You teach structure after growth, and Scripture always follows that order. The lie of holy poverty. There is no virtue in lack, only lessons. Scripture never commands men to remain weak, only to remain aligned. The idea that poverty is holiness is not biblical. It is institutional, because dependent men are easier to manage. The real wealth warning, hidden in the verse. The danger is not money. The danger is confusing money with meaning, and only men with money face that danger. Which means the verse is not discouraging pursuit. It is warning against replacement. So what happens when you outgrow the verse? Once wealth is stable, once provision is predictable, once survival is no longer the obsession, this verse stops sounding restrictive. It starts sounding protective. That's how you know you've crossed the threshold. Why most people never reach this stage? Because they stopped moving too early. They mistook warning for prohibition, caution for condemnation, and Scripture never condemns movement. The final reframe. This verse wasn't meant to stop you from building. It was meant to stop you from bowing, and those are not the same thing. Closing line, high retention end. If this verse has ever made you feel small, it was never meant for your current position. Outgrow it, then return to it, and you'll finally understand why it was written.